Hey friends, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and I'm here today with Adam Winrich. And Adam, you have a really neat nylon bullwhip design to show us today. It's very minimal, requires very few materials and tools, and we think it's great for a beginner. Adam, tell us a little bit about this whip we're going to make today.
So we're calling it the Bare Bones Bullwhip. There were lots of other names that were suggested to us, such as the No Bull Bullwhip or the No Nonsense Bullwhip. And some features about it compared to other nylon whip designs is that with this design, there's no waxing, no tying of any Turk's heads, no braided belly, virtually no decoring of the paracord strands, and there's no electrical tape. There's a lot of no's going on with this whip. We tried to simplify it as much as we could. Nick and I were talking about the problems that some beginning level whip makers have when they look at the designs like, oh, I gotta buy a whole roaster and I gotta fill it with wax. That can be a problem. So we want to make a whip design that made things easier for people to learn. So the only materials you need for this, it's a really short list. Obviously you need paracord, then you're gonna need some for the handle foundation. We use fiberglass. Then you're gonna need some chair tips to use on the end of the whip instead of a Turk's head, some epoxy to fasten that on, and of course some artificial sinew to bind everything on the inside. So while it makes it easier that you don't have to tie any Turk's heads, probably one challenge might be the different braiding technique of braiding the whip from the point, adding in strands as you go, and then having to be very careful how you finish off the braiding when you get to the end of the handle, so that way your chair tip fits on just right. So where we're going to make this whip is where I thought the light would be the best to take advantage of a beautiful fall day in Fall Creek, Wisconsin. So this is the clothesline. So really you can braid anywhere if you know how to attach your whip to stuff. So I'm just going to take some of my scrap paracord, because I assume everybody must have some scrap paracord. And I'm just going to tie a loop over here, and it's going to do a little overhand knot with both ends. Oop. And then like so. And now I'll be able to tie like a little lark's head knot around everything that I want to braid from. And I'll just braid from here. So I live in an RV for about 10 months out of the year, practically a full-time RVer, and it can be hard to find spots to braid in the RV. So usually I just take a piece of paracord and loop it through one of the door hinges, and all of those are pretty solid, and then I braid from that. But in this instance, we're going to braid from the upright of this clothesline. So all the materials we have here are everything we need. Don't need a whole lot. I have my 550 cord with the core left in. You don't need to have 3 colors. We just happen to have 3 colors because we're kind of do a little coral snake pattern with this one. And then you're going to need a piece of fiberglass for the handle foundation. We're going to use a 12-inch length of 5/16 inch fiberglass. We just bought these at Walmart. They're sort of reflector rods, pretty cheap. So we got paracord, handle foundation. Then you're going to need some artificial sinew for binding. And instead of tying knots on the butt end of the whip, we're just going to use epoxy to glue on a chair tip on the end, and that'll make finishing off the whip super simple. And then for tools, I did use a hacksaw and a file to cut and file the piece of fiberglass. The main things I'll need are scissors, a lighter, a knife, and my measuring tape. Since I already have my handle foundation set, the first thing I need to do is make the core. So my first step for the core, I'm going to grab myself a short little piece of paracord like so, and then I'm going to tie a little overhand knot in it. And all of my core strands are going to get looped through this. And then why I like having it is so that way I can take my little strand up here and boom, stick it in there like that. And then it's I can start braiding, and then I can loosen it and take it down. So one important thing for every whip making project, have a notepad and take notes. I'm going to be taking notes while I do this so I can tell everybody at the end exactly how much paracord I used. So that's kind of important. Everybody wants to know that. I want the core of my whip, that's going to be a 6.5 foot bull whip. I want my core to be 4 foot long. I've got my little loopy loop right there. So I kind of set things like this. And gonna first measure, I'm gonna measure 4 foot, but then I want this to double over. Let's see, so that's about 4 foot there. So I'm gonna do here, So the one I measured is 4 foot. And I'm gonna unspool this a little bit more. And so I want all of these strands to taper. It was a little bit hard to see right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one right about there. So the main one I'm worried about measuring is the longest one that I want 4 foot. And then I'm gonna cut 4 more pieces, and I'm gonna stagger them all, all the way back to about here. And I found a fun little trick for unspooling paracord is just take a wooden dowel, put it through and pull it off. And then I've got a bunch of paracord unspooled. Makes my life go by a little bit faster. And let's see, about how far is that gap there? Yeah, I'm doing about 3 inches of like 3 inches, somewhere in there for this 4.5 foot core. This is just sort of an approximate tapering, so I waste less parachute cord. And then once I get all of this bound onto the handle, I can go put it up on my little noose right here, a loop-de-loop, and look back at how it tapers and feel how it tapers and go back in with my scissors and modify it. So because I know I can go back and modify it and trim it up a little bit, I'm making my staggers a little bit shorter. Yeah, I'm only doing about 2.5 inches right now. Oop, need to pull off some more paracord. If you want to be real fancy with your rolls, my cousin had a business where he made paddles wrapped in parachute cord. So he built himself a whole stand, a whole rack with dowels going through it, and had all of his different colors of paracord up on a rack. But probably those of you watching this video are not going to be that advanced because you're a beginning whip maker. Or you may just be a whip maker who wants a cheaper, faster whip to make. Let's see, so I got 4 of them done, and I'm gonna bind in some extra core strands right here, so I know that this strand only has to kind of come into here, so I can kind of make this one a little bit shorter. Cut that one there. And if I were being real cheap, low down, and lazy, I could just leave it like that. It still has a taper. I wouldn't have to adjust the taper at all. So now I can put this paracord back up on the spool, and you can use whatever color you want for the inside. I just decided to use the black color, and then I'm going to take each one of these here like so, loop them through this like that, and then like that, and then now I need to bind them onto my handle using my artificial sinew. And I want this binding to be really tight. So in my previous videos, I would use my patented sort of foothold where I just be barefoot on the floor, just put this in between my feet. But we're out on the ground. So what I'm gonna do, a little knot, and then gonna back up and spool some out. Try to guesstimate how much I'll need to bind that handle. And then this is fixed, so I'll start binding and just wrap it up. Wrap the handle up in the binding as I go. So like that. Over to here. So you can see I place this. Let's see, kind of. I hold it right about like that, so all of the, so my little loop-de-loop kind of is flush right with the end of the fiberglass. And now hold it down with my thumb. And while I'm binding these on, I'm going to kind of try to evenly space out my paracord. So there's Overall, we have 10 strands now running the length of the handle. So you should be able to see I'm trying to evenly space them out, and I'm kind of binding back right up to the end of the fiberglass handle foundation. Then I'm going to bind back down towards the other end of the handle to hold down my loose end. And now as I go, I'm going to make sure I evenly space out all of my strands around the handle. I don't want any of them like bunched up on each other. If you were to use a thinner rod for the handle, say a 1/4-inch steel rod, like one problem you would have here is that your strands would bunch up on each other. And now you can see as I'm binding, I sort of try to keep my strands organized in one hand, and then I just sort of rotate it and give a little tug so I can keep my binding real tight. And I'm just going to go all the way down the handle. Approximate build time for this whip, at least when I did it yesterday to make the prototype, was about 2 hours. And I was asking Nick Schrader this morning, how long do you think this video is going to be? And Nick was like, oh, half hour, 45 minutes tops. However, it may be totally possible for me to talk during the entire build time, and that will make Nick's editing job much more difficult. So I could mention, it is kind of common, say in whip designs, if you're like in some whip designs, there would be, I don't know, 2, 3 braided bellies for paracord. So if you do that, you can braid it tight, and there's probably not that much binding. But in other whip designs, such as the old school American bullwhip designs where there was no braided belly, or even in the sort of modern day Pakistani bullwhips you can find under like the name Ardur or Leathercraft on eBay or Amazon, there's also not much of a braided belly on the inside of those whips, but there is a lot of binding. I've actually taken several apart and rebuilt them, and I don't know how the binding for them is easier than just doing a good job braiding, but apparently it is. But there's a lot of binding in those. So my basic point is you can either make the inside of a whip firm by braiding it, or you can make it firm by binding it. But really, in this instance, the only part that has to be bound tightly is the handle here, because we don't want that to loosen up while you're using the whip. Okay, now I'm to the end of the handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of grab a little loop like this, stick that over the end of the handle, and that makes a little hitch so I can hold that in place. And now I'm going to bind in a few little folded over scraps of paracord that don't have the core in it to try to build up the diameter right here where the handle ends. So we'll set that down, because everybody should have a basket of scrap paracord. Pick out a couple, cut a few. Looks like I need one more. There we go. So now all these are going to get folded over. Come back to here. And then there would be about a 1/2 inch overlap. So you notice I just fold it over, sticks out about that much, and then hold it down. And then grab the next one, double it over. So I'm trying to evenly space out all 5 of these around my core. Maybe someday Nick Schrader will make a Bob Ross style whip video where it's filled with, what did he call them? Happy mistakes?
Happy little accidents.
Happy little accidents. There are no accidents in whip making, only in whip cracking. Oh, actually, there's probably plenty of accidents in whip making. We'll probably talk about some accidents you could have with this design later in the video. All right, so now I've bound in all 5 of those strands tightly. So now I'm just gonna, I still need to trim these down. So I'm gonna just go over this lightly now, just to hold them in place. I'm just gonna bind for like about an inch off the handle, just to kind of hold those. I'm not doing this part super tight. You actually don't need to reinforce the transition a whole lot, if at all, with this design of whip. And then now I'm going to start going back and twist it on back. And then do it tight again, and then a couple more. Let's see if I can work a couple little bit more loop-de-loops, and then I'll be ready to sort of cut this off there. And now I can put this little end in my noose. And so I'm going to now trim all these little extra cordless strands I put in here. Suppose it would have visually looked better if I had picked a different color for these instead of black on black. But so I'm going to make the longest one 5 inches. I'm going to cut it there. And then the shortest one, I'm going to go right next to it here, right behind it. That one's going to be right flush with the end of my binding. And now I'm just going to go around and cut the other 8 ones, just so it's an either evenly spaced, all the way back down. And I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm probably doing like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, somewhere in there. At least it's easy for me to tell which ones to cut, because I bound in pieces of paracord without the core in it. So I know that all of my core strands that I bound onto the handle all have the core, so they feel very different. Go last one. There. Snip, snip. So there. Now all these are evenly spaced. And this pretty much demonstrates kind of a classic. Ooh, I got one other one. I forgot to cut. So we'll just make that one a little long. This demonstrates sort of a classic method of tapering with all bull whips that are kind of heavy or have a thicker handle, is you want it to taper pretty quickly off the handle. You don't want a whole lot of bulk right here. Otherwise, that kind of works against you when you're cracking the whip. So now, let me just double check that my longest strand from the end of the handle to the end of the core, yep, that's 4 foot. So now I'm just going to go back with my scissors and kind of even out the taper. So I'm going to do a couple starting here. I'm going about 3 inches. Then let's cut the next one about 3 inches. It's kind of like giving the core a haircut, if you will. And I'm basically just trying to evenly space out all my strands all the way down. And you can really control the shape of your whip this way. If you want a much lighter, faster whip, you have them taper faster up here. If you want a heavier whip that's better for cutting, then you taper it slower. So I'm just trying to do sort of a middle of the road taper right now that should kind of work for most cracking and most cutting. Let's see. Let's try to even out some of these other ones. That's a little uneven. Let's bring this one back. Bring that one back. And then that one there. I'd say that looks much better. They're more evenly spaced out. And so now, because with this bullwhip design, we're going to be braiding from the point, so I can't leave all of these loose strands loose like this because it'd be really hard to insert them. So I'm going to take another kind of long piece of artificial sinew here. My arm spread is about 6 foot, so I'm going to cut off a piece that's, I guess, about 12 foot long, a little bit longer than that. And I'm going to take this and go around, or take this piece of artificial sinew, kind of start here, and go around and bind the whole thing so that way I'm holding everything down. And I swear this building of the core is probably the most tedious part of this build. But once you're done and you start braiding, I think you'll be surprised at how quickly it goes together once you're done with the core. Again, the point of this binding is trying to hold down all of your strands. So all of my wraps I'm kind of trying to position so that way they kind of land at the end of each one of the strands, so they hold them down and they don't come popping out when I'm trying to braid over this section of the whip. And if you wanted to make this part of the build easier, you could just do a whole wrap of this core from one end to the other in either electrical tape or athletic tape. But in this design, we wanted to minimalize what you actually needed, because you actually do need sinew to bind the handle. And so we wanted to say there's no waxing, no Turk set, and no tape. Some people think tape is really bad inside whips. So here we go now. I don't have to bind over my single piece, but I'm just going to bind here to the end of where the second to last strand ends. And now I'm going to start binding back. Now it's a little bit long to do one strand, bind all the way down and all the way back. Usually in my juggling whip design, which has only a 3-foot core, it's much easier to just use one full strand and bind all the way down and all the way back with one strand. So for here, I'm just gonna start binding back and go as far as I can. And the one argument for going all the way around one way and then going around the other way is you kind of do put a little twist in the core when you wrap it this way. So by going back and crossing yourself or wrapping the other way, it kind of straightens everything out. It takes that twist back out. But glancing down at it, it doesn't look like I put too much of a twist in it. And also it gives me a second opportunity to place a wrap right at the end of my sort of core strands where they're cut, and that kind of helps hold them in place when I start braiding. So here we go. I almost made it all the way back, not quite. If I wanted to, I could like bind in another piece and rebraid this part, but it's not critical. So I'm just going to take this and do a little sort of hoop, hitch it one way, and then do one more little overhand hitch in there. Come here. There we go. That'll hold it. And now I can start cutting out strands for the overlay. So now for the start of my overlay, I'm going to need another little scrap piece of paracord to make another little loop that will basically hold my overlay strands while I start braiding from the point. So we're just going to tie that there, put that into my sort of Braiding paracord. I've been calling it a noose, but that's a little macabre. So, and now the only strands I'm going to measure out of this are my first two strands. And we are braiding from the point, and we're doubling everything over. So this first strand is going to, or the first two strands, I'm going to make black. I'm going to cut each one 22 feet long, because yesterday we cut them 24 feet long for a 6.5 foot bullwhip, and then realized when we were done, oh, I could totally shave 2 feet off. And then once I start braiding with these two guys, I'm actually going to measure every successive strand off of them for a couple reasons. One, I know these will be like my longest strands, so if they aren't long enough to cover the whip, it doesn't matter. And also, with this design, if you were to measure all the strands and cut them, as you add them in, it could be difficult to keep track of which strand is which length. And if you add in a strand that's too short, then you won't have enough length to finish the whip. So we double this one over like that, there. This will be our first strand. And then I'm gonna find the middle of our other strand and double this one over and kind of set it to the side. So here's the middle, because we got a little bit of twisting to do before we add that one in. So here we go. So to start the whip, I'm gonna do a 2-strand twist for 7 inches. And this little loop right here is where the fall is going to tie into, or just the cracker if you don't want to have a fall. You can see I've got it pinched between thumb and forefinger of my left hand. I twist basically clockwise in my right hand, and then I bring it over, feed the other one under, and keep on twisting down. And I got a little bit of a back twist here that I do have to take out. So yeah, about 7 inches. So now, let me take the back twist out. Now to an important part, the process of adding strands. So now we're going to switch from a 2-strand twist to a 4-strand braid. So what I'm going to do is put the middle of my 1 strand over one of the twisted strands. So my new added strand, both of them go out this way to my right. Both the twisted strands go to my left. It's up there, and I'm going to bring my 1 twisted strand under one, over one, and start my 4-strand braid just like that. And now I'm ready to bring in the upper part of my strand here and come under one, over one. And I kind of want to make sure this little spot where I added it to, it's kind of easy to have this loosen up. So you kind of want to make sure you pull in your twisted strands tight so you don't have like a big loose gap right here, otherwise they can get kind of floppy. So now I'm into a 4-strand braid, and I will do the 4-strand braid for another 7 inches. And with the tension right now, I'm pulling it a little bit. I'm not pulling it super tight, just putting a little bit of tension on it so that way the strands are in, so the braiding isn't super stiff, but it's also not super floppy. This should be 14 inches total length. Go good. Get my back braiding out of there. Now I'm gonna just hitch this off for a second, and I'm gonna cut my next strand. My next strand is gonna be red, and put one end there, go match it along, go up to there, double it over. There. Now I'm ready to add this one in. So here we're going to add to 6 plait. So I've got my double strand over. I'm going to kind of hold it here in the back, and then on one side I'm going to come through under one, over one, like that. And then the other side is going to come in under one and now over 2. So now I'm going, when I start braiding, it'll be under 2, over 1 on one side, and then under 1, over 2 on the other side. And you notice there is like a little bit of a double up right there. but the way I'm adding the colors, that'll kind of camouflage that. So now I'll braid 8 inches of 6 plait. Here I'm doing a left one, so I'm going under 1 over 2 on the left, and then under 2 over 1 on the right. Here. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my 8 plait strand, and the specific pattern I'm going to go for is sort of a coral snake pattern. So I actually went a little bit past 8 inches with the 6 plait section because I want the red to be lined up as my last 2 strands that I just braided. So that way when I add in this next red strand, it'll be right next to my previous red strand. Okay. So now to add my 8 plait strand, again place the strand in the back, and now to start it I'm going to go under 1 over 2 like that, and my other side of it is going to go under 2 over 2 right there. And now I'm into 8 plait, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to braid this so the whole length of the tip of my whip is 30 inches, and then I will add the core. So now, to add the core in, vital step in this technique of building a whip. Now to add my core into the braiding, I'm going to slide the core up underneath the last stitch that I brought over. Let some of the core stick out. And just going to braid for a ways to hold that core in. And once I've braided far enough over the core, I'm going to pull it in so that way the very end of it is tucked inside the whip. And let's see, yeah, let's do one more. Take some of this tangle out of there. And so when I pull this in, I want to make sure that I'm careful to just pull it just enough, real careful, just so the end of that core is stuck inside the whip, but I don't want to pull it all the way out, which is very easy to do. And now, keep braiding 8 plait until it's ready to add my next strand. Okay, now I'm ready to add my 10 plait strand, and I'm going to make it a white one to add an accent to the red and the black. And just a couple things about how far I braided. First we'll just measure it and see about what it was. Let's see, right now I'm to about the 38¼ mark, somewhere about there. So the main two things I want to do is I braided 8 plait up almost up to where my 3rd core strand starts. So I only want to be braiding 8 plait over 2 core strands. I want to get into 10 plait before I get over that 3rd core strand. And the other thing, because of the color pattern that I want to make sure I add the white strand at the end of the black or at the end of the red. I don't want to put the white strand in the middle of the black or in the middle of the red, because I kind of want this to have a sort of coral snake vibe to the pattern, because everybody seems to like it. So adding in my 10 plait strand, again place the strand to the back, sort of pin it there with the forefinger of my left hand, and now I'm going to On the right side, go under 2, over 2. So you see that one there. And now I can hold it in place with my right hand. And on the other side, I'm going to go under 2, over 3. And that will get my strand in position. And now my 10 plait pattern on the right side is going to be under 3, over 2. And then here on the left side will be under 2, over 3. And if I braid for a little while, you'll see that the sort of coral snake type pattern is starting to take shape. And I'm going to take a little pause here and point out one thing you guys can do that I'm going to do is, instead of trying to braid the whole whip with the point stuck up there, with the little sort of noose system, I can tie this off and I can stick this part of my whip right here. I just undo my lark's head knot, like so, and just slide the thong of the whip in there. I can make 2 fingers in there and double it over. So now I got my little loop that's only tightens up when I pull on it. And I'll slide the whip through there. And now I can slide it all the way up to here and continue braiding. And it'll be much easier for me to keep my braiding straight and my seam straight, because right now the gravity of the point of the whip is always going to be hanging straight down, so it makes it much harder for the whip to twist. Okay, so now I'm in the right position to add my next white strand and go up to 12 plait. All right, so now I go on and cut my next strand to bring it up to 12 plait. It's a white one. And you can see I've braided to the end of the red, and I have the white right in the middle. So now when I add this strand, again, hold it in the back, I'm going to go over 3, and you can see it's going to engage, match up right there with my white one there. And then I'm also going to go under 3, over 3 on the other side. So there. So now I can start braiding under 3, over 3 on both sides. So while I'm braiding, let me tell you the story about the spider and the apple. So actually, it's not much of a story. It's just that so while I'm here at my dad's house in Fall Creek, I park my RV that I live in about 10 months out of the year over at my cousin's house next door. And he's got a very nice little apple tree that kind of has too many apples on it for how big it is. So I had to go over, get something out of the RV, and I'm going to pick one of these apples. And I picked it and shined it on my shirt, and I started walking back over to here to the house, and I was eating it, and then I got almost done with it when all of a sudden, I feel this little thing on my arm, and I see, oh, there's a little green little spider on my forearm. And I realize he must have been like crouched into right next to the stem of the apple. So can you imagine being an innocent little spider sitting next to the stem of an apple on a sunny fall day, minding your own business, when all of a sudden this huge mouth gets closer and closer to you until finally you can't take it anymore and you scream, "Abandon apple, abandon apple!" And then you abandon the apple and you run down the forearm of some giant creature, and then that giant creature like flicks you off into the poison ivy in the ditch. Anyway, I like the expression, "Abandon apple, abandon apple." That's what that spider had to do. So Nick just told me he likes watching spiders spin webs. So as an anecdote, when I went to go visit Chris Barr for the first time back in 2007, we hung out for a week and made whips, and he had a giant spider kind of in the open basement of his house. So it's the middle of the nowhere outback in Queensland. So the evening entertainment was finding bugs to throw into the web of the spider and then watch it immediately pounce on them and bind up the bugs. So that's some of the fun you can have if you're like me, really care about whip making, and you fly yourself all the way to Australia to learn the Australian secrets. The secret is have a big spider there doing some of the braiding for you. All right, so now we're going up to 14 plait. So on one side, I'll go hold my strand in the back, go under 3 over 3 on one side, and now I'm going to go under 3 over 4 on the other side, kind of mush it up in there. And now my 14 strand pattern is going to be under 4 over 3 on the right, and then under 3 over 4 on the left. And let's see, about how far the 12 plait did I braid before I added it in? Looks like I braided, let's see, my double should be right there, braided about 10 inches, a 12 plait. And now I've got about 2 feet left to go. I have one more strand to add. But pretty much what I'm going to do is braid about to the middle point between where my handle ends and where I am now, and then I'll add my 16 plait strand. When I was a kid, I was deathly afraid of spiders, so scared of spiders. Like even if I was in the ditch, like picking strawberries or something, and a daddy longlegs got on my leg, I would freak out. And because I've slowly gotten over it, but I mean, there are spiders that are very venomous, so it's a healthy thing to be frightened of them. Another spider story, it's a friend of mine's, but it's sort of related to me because I used to work a Renaissance fair down in Texas. Well, I still work at it, called the Scarborough Renaissance Fair in Waxahachie, Texas. It's in April and May. And now I live in my RV, but before I had the RV, I sort of lived in whatever shack the Renaissance fairs could provide for me. So I was living in a little sort of half-finished loft space above one of the stages. And I did it for a couple years, and it was fine. And then eventually I got the RV. Well, this juggling friend of mine, who's actually going to be performing tomorrow at Oktoberfest in Chippewa Falls, he eventually took over my old space with his girlfriend. And it was like a really small space. And she like hates bugs and is really allergic to bug bites. So anyway, they move in, and they're moving their stuff in, and they see a brown recluse spider on the window. Oh, no. And she hates bugs, scares spiders, and like, Kale, kill it, kill it. So Kale takes a swing at the spider, only wounds it, and it falls onto the floor. But then an even bigger brown recluse spider, because the other one's brown recluse, even bigger brown recluse crawls out from underneath of the carpet. No way. Yeah. And I don't remember seeing any brown recluse while I was there. I heard stories of them being around, but I always got the impression that they were so reclusive that she would only find them in, say, some old barn that had a bunch of cardboard boxes that hadn't been disturbed for years. But I guess there were brown recluse spiders in my loft space. And the juggling friend of mine and his girlfriend totally saw them. I don't know if they saw any more after that. Spider trauma. I'm just gonna bring around all of my red strands, and then I'll add in one more red strand to bring it up to 16 plait. And I know it's spelled P-L-A-I-T. And when I started out whip making and I only read the word, I assumed it was plait. But for some reason, maybe because of like, I don't know, the French influence on the English language, it is pronounced plait, not plate. Nope. So here we go. Run all my red ones around. I'm just gonna do a little knot here, a little hitch to hold it steady. And I can cut out the last strand. I braided 14 plait for approximately 6 inches. And I got about another 6-7 inches to go to the handle. So that's good enough. So now put my last strand in the back. I'm going to go under 3 over 4 to add it. And then now I'm going to go under 4 over 4 on the left side. Add it there, add it in with all the other red strands like so. And now my 16 strand pattern will be under 4, over 4 on both sides. Now I'm just going to keep my sort of light to medium tension in the braiding, continuing on until I get onto the handle, and then I'm going to start pulling super tight because I don't want the handle to be loose. Let's see, so I'm still keeping my kind of even tension, sort of trying to make sure I don't let any fuzzy parts of my little extra strands here at the transition stick out of the braiding. But if they do stick out, it's not the end of the world. I can just burn them off with a cigarette lighter. And kind of see I'm pulling a little bit in on the back and kind of push it up with my thumbs in the front. And I kind of got to be more careful about pushing the strands into place as I get up onto where I bound in those extra strands at the transition, because that's where I'm most likely to have gaps in my braiding. So I'm really trying to make sure, I'm not so much worried about gaps in the back. Braiding with the core left in usually results more likely with gaps in the front than in the back for some reason. And I can kind of start increasing a little bit of my tension on the back as I start getting here. Okay, now I'm coming off of those extra strands, and this is where it wants to get gappy. So see, when I put the strand there, it immediately just wants to naturally sit with a gap like that. So I've got to grab onto the strands below it and cinch it up and kind of keep doing that along this whole section right here. See there, it wants to naturally gap out. So really push them up in there so I don't have any gaps. And this is a no knot bullwhip. So normally, if I were making like a juggling whip or another type of whip with this sort of braided pattern, if I had gaps right here, you just cover that with a Turk's head. Kind of in any old school whip design you see, the reason for extra knots on the body of the whip was usually to cover up braiding mistakes or awkward transitions. That was the point of those knots. I mean, also for decoration, but to cover up stuff that wasn't pretty and to add a little bit of extra interest to the whip. But here in the Adam Winrich, Nick Schrader, bare bones bullwhip design, we don't want you to have to do extra work. Just braid this part without any gaps, and then you don't have to tie a Turk's head right there. And then I'm almost completely off the flexible part of the whip. And kind of as soon as all of my braiding and working strands are onto the handle, I'm almost there. Now, you can kind of see a little extra lump there from the extra strands we bound in. Now I'm ready to stand up and start pulling in all of my strands super tight. So for the handle, I'm going to go ahead and braid as tight as I can. So for tight braiding, I kind of reach through, so if I'm going to reach through with my right hand, I'm going to put my finger there, hold those strands, reach through, grab this strand, kind of put it in position in the back, grab it like this, sort of loop it over my fingers, and now I'm going to kind of hold it to my chest, pull it tight, and then lay it over. So this is sort of the pull tight, plait loose mode of the whip making. So again, grab it, wrap it around my fingers, pull it tight, and then put it into position. It's one little anecdote about sort of braiding outside and kind of pulling tight and plaiting loose. For several years, I went down to the Prairie Villa Rendezvous in Prairie du Chien, sort of a pre-1840s era fur trade reenactment. And a couple of the years I was down there just making whips, and one year I set myself up under a big shade tree, braiding up some cowhide bull whips and selling a few of them. And I wasn't really in a major thoroughfare. I was kind of all the way across this lawn area. So no one was walking by asking me questions. People could just see me from a distance. And I was doing this little dance here, standing, braiding, and then shifting my weight. And somebody saw me later and was asking, like, what was that little dance you were doing over there by the tree? That seemed weird. What was going on over there? Well, I was just making a whip. And of course the difference between like this design and a leather whip is that a leather whip you would pretty much be pulling like this for the whole length of the whip to pull in the strands tight, particularly the whips I was making, which were 4-plait. So you got to pull a lot more on those strands and add a lot of grease to get it to pull in tight. But paracord, in this instance, really only has to be pulled in tight on the handle, just so the handle doesn't fall apart.
Whenever I'm making a whip at the park next to my house by a lake, people always walk by and so many of them assume that I'm getting like a fishing rod ready or something. Like, oh, you gonna catch some fish today? It's like, well, maybe I'll fish after I make this whip. They have no idea. They don't know what's going on.
Sometimes with those questions, all you can be is like, yup,
Yep.
yup. The answer is too long to explain. Okay, so now I'm getting to the end of my handle. And the problem we're going to deal with here is a problem that people that braid stock whip handles from the keeper end also have. Is like, how do you finish off a braid when you're braiding off something so big and chunky? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, still pulling my strands in tight, I'm going to kind of do a few stitches past the end of the handle on this side. Let's see, maybe I can get one more in there. So you can see there when I brought that one around, it really didn't have anything to set on. So it sort of plunked out. So I'm going to mush that up in there. And now I'll pinch with my thumb and forefinger. And I'm going to go ahead and just tie a square knot with these two crossing strands. So like that. And then do another one again to tie the square knot. Like so. So that's locked off. Now I can put this up here. And now I completely turned it around, so now I'm looking at the back side. And now I'm going to do the same thing, except braiding from here and bring it down. So I'm going to pull and put it in place. And now I'll hold on to this one, and I'll pull on this one, cross them like that. So to make sure things don't spin, I'm always going to be grabbing on to all the strands that just came over on the one side, and then pulling the strand that I just put into place tight. Now grab onto these two, pull that in tight, grab onto these three, pull that in tight. So I'm going to keep going until I've kind of got my side seam here just off or just right at the end of the handle. Now I'm going over 4. I think I can get one more red one here. This red one can go over 4. I'll pull him in tight. And now I can take these two front ones, pinch it off, and tie a square knot. And all the square knots are doing is just holding my braiding sort of temporarily in place, so that now I can bind this off right at the end of the fiberglass and cut it clean off with a knife and burn it. Just like when I was tightly binding the start of the handle, I'm gonna take my artificial sinew, cut a length of it, and tie it up to whatever I'm braiding from, because when I bind that end of the handle off, I'm gonna want to make sure it's bound super tight. There. good. Then, all right, so I'm just gonna, I know my end of my handle is about here, so I'm just gonna kind of go a 1/2 inch in, hold the end down with my thumb, sort of do a couple little wraps. Just get these out of the way. Looks like I still got a lot of excess for this design. And do another little wrappy wrap. There, and now I should be ready to pull this in and start binding tight. And I'm gonna kind of peek in there. I should be able to see about where the end of my fiberglass is. So I wanna make sure I bind. Right now I just wanna bind just about to there. Do a little bit more binding. And now I'm gonna hitch this off. So I sort of put my hand like that, make a little loop like so, place that over my handle, pull this out, and there. And that'll hold that in position. Let's do it one more time. And now the next step with ending these off is to undo my knots. So I don't need those anymore. Those were just temporary. Undo the other side. And now I want to pull all my strands in tight. So I'm gonna start with one of them. I'm gonna pull all the ones that are kind of going this way first. So I'll start with one and I just pull them all in tight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. So I pulled half of them. I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit more binding now on this. Like that. Hitch it off. And then I'll be ready to pull in the other side. So now we'll switch and start with one of them and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8. And if this seems like a big hassle, just remember you're doing this because you don't know how to tie a Turk's head. Or basically that's why, I mean, this version also works if you do have to tie a Turk's head. But there, so now all the strands are tight. So now I'm just gonna double check and see where the end of my binding is. And I'm gonna bind out my overlay strands just a little bit further. So my binding here goes all the way to the end of my handle foundation. I don't wanna go much past it, but I do wanna get like right to it. See there, that should be good. There. Now let's do a couple more little wraps and a couple more hitches around. Like so. And now I can cut this off, like that, and now I can take my stool, take my little utility knife, and if I bound it just right, when I cut straight through, I should only cut paracord and not cut the fiberglass. But it's not the end of the world if the fiberglass sticks out a little bit. That's going to be covered up anyway. There we go, that's the end of that. Now let's give this a little bit of a haircut. And now I can It's a little windy out here. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can fuse all of it. That's good enough. Now, open up our little container of chair caps. Let's just check the fit of it, see if I got close. Ooh, yep, wow. That's nice, pretty snug. So we take this off, and I just gotta mix up some epoxy. I think that's good. Nick and I were wondering, yeah, how wrong can you be with mixing up your epoxy? Like, how off can you be on the 50-50 proportions and still have it work? We don't know. Let's see, I really just want to scoop all this in there. Good enough. All right, so slather that all around. So really the chair cap is like the best idea we had for a no Turk's head bullwhip. Obviously, if you have something better you want to stick on the end of your handle instead of a Turk's head, by all means go and do it. So we just shove this up there. I'm probably going to squeeze out a little bit of epoxy. Just going to give that a little bit of a spin. And I'm kind of just going to let a little extra epoxy stick out of that because it's not the end of the world. And so it's 5-minute epoxy. So we just let that sit, and then we're almost done with our bullwhip. Now we're ready to put the fall on. So you notice I did cut a bunch of extra paracord off the butt end of the bullwhip. So not all of this is going to go to waste. Some of it can go back in your scrap basket. One of these pieces is going to get used for the fall. So first I'm going to totally melt one end. So the fall, of course, is the end of the replaceable end of the whip that the cracker attaches to. So first I just want a really good bead on the end of it because that's what's going to hold the fall in place. There we go. That's a good one. Now, come here to the end of my whip and go ahead and cut out the little loop I used while I was braiding it. Take that out. This is the end of my fall here. Place it through the loop like that. Now bring it around the back side and then sort of through itself. And now I just pull it in tight, and you will see that the little bead of burned fused melted paracord is what's going to hold it in place so it doesn't come sliding off. And now I'm going to take measuring tape, measure out to 24 inches. Go ahead and cut that off. And then I'm going to peel back some of the core of the paracord, cut that out so my fall has a little bit of a taper, and fuse the end. One way you can know that your paracord is kind of worn out and needs to be replaced is you can't fuse it anymore. Old worn out paracord will just turn to ash. So now I cut a little bit of the artificial sinew. I'm gonna make my cracker out of this, so I sort of double it over, leaving one end just a little bit longer than the other. And then I'm gonna go ahead, loop this over, put that through, loop it on so, pull it in tight, and now I'll actually twist the cracker while it's on the whip. This is usually how I make crackers out of, or poppers or snappers, out of baling twine that I use in my shows, or poly twine. It's probably just as easy to, I would say just as easy to pre-twist this ahead of time but polypropylene crackers don't twist very well by the sort of traditional methods of either using a drill or twisting the whole length and doubling it back on itself. For the snapper or popper, you could also use Kevlar thread. You can use Kevlar or Spectra, fishing line. People seem to really enjoy experimenting with different types of cracker, popper, or snapper material. I've used artificial sinew a lot. It's nylon, it's waxed, it works just fine. Though for my shows, especially for two-handed whip cracking, I like using polypropylene, mainly baling twine, because when you're using two whips especially, it's less likely to tangle. Let's see, one more. Now I take the end that's a little bit long, and then I sort of going to do a hitch around the back, and then underneath itself, pull tight. And we're almost done. One last step to go. The very last step for making this whip is called rolling. This is what's going to smooth out all the braiding. You can either use it on a smooth floor. It's concrete's not smooth, so I put down a piece of leather, and then I have a board I'm going to use. I also stapled some leather onto this to give it a little bit of a grip. And I just apply some downward pressure, and I'm just going to go all the way down the whip, rolling it. It helps round out the whip, smooth the braiding. It sets all the braids in place, and it's kind of the final step in a lot of braiding and leather work. Here we go. And it is done. Here's the first crack, Nick. Here we go. We're gonna crack it. And woo! And here are the first couple snaps were just a little light because I've got to break the wax in off of that popper.
Guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. Adam, thank you so much for showing this really neat build to all of us, and I challenge you all to give it a try. Even if you're not a beginner, this is a really fun, quick build to do. And of course, if you're a beginner, this is a friendly project because of the minimal tools and materials. So Adam, if you have any shows or anything coming up where people can check out what you're going to be doing in the next few months or even next year, where can we find that information?
My general schedule is 4 Renaissance festivals a year: the Arizona Renaissance Festival in Arizona, the Scarborough Renaissance Festival south of Dallas, the Bristol Renaissance Fair in between Milwaukee and Chicago, and then up next this autumn I will be at the Texas Renaissance Festival just north of Houston.
Appreciate you showing us this build.
Thanks, Nick.
See you next time.